Maybe some of the folks trickling in, but I think we will get started. Hello to the regulars. It's nice to see you all. Have you all been here all 5 weeks or four? You were here for 4 of the weeks? 4 weeks, yeah, four or five. Okay, all right. Well, thank you for coming back. I appreciate it. Today's session should be pretty fun. We're going to kind of take everything that we learned from the last 4 weeks of concepts and kind of put it together into what I think is one of the most fun things to do with data, which is to make a dashboard. So this one will be very hands-on, kind of like the other ones. This will be a little bit more freeform, a little bit of a chance for you to just sort of design how you want to do it. But we'll talk a little bit also about the design of dashboards and how to do that effectively. And as folks who are in sort of the communications space more broadly, I think this piece might be really interesting and kind of intersect with some of the other pieces of y'all's education here. So cool. So yeah, so basically what we're going to do today is design a dashboard and then build that dashboard using all of the different tools that we've talked about so far. So our formatting, formulas, charts, tables, lots of uses of our pivot tables and charts that we talked about last week. So we're going to bring that all together into our dashboard today. All right, so we're going to talk, like I said, about dashboard design a little bit first. This is a place that a lot of sort of purely technical data folks tend to skip a lot of this part of the step or not be as strong at this part of the step. I think this is a piece, since you all are coming from more of a sort of broader background, I think this will actually be really cool conversation for you all. We're going to talk about actually building those elements of your dashboard, how to do layout, how to think about interactive features of your dashboard, how to think about collaborating on your dashboard, making improvements, iterating on it over time, and all of that. So this is everything that we've covered so far. This has been quite a bit over the past month, and all of this is going to come together into our dashboard. So we're going to use all of these tools kind of in different places and different pieces of what we're working on today to create this final product, which is hopefully fun and interesting for you all. All right, do you all have an idea of what a dashboard is before we get into this? Is that like a familiar, like if I say data dashboard, does like something come to mind for anyone?
Place where you combine all of it, and whenever you need, you just go back and then it will directly tell you how to do it.
Perfect. Yeah. So kind of like an easy, like come back to one place and see maybe all of your information or all the different parts of your data. Yeah, that's basically what we're going for. So these are some examples of pretty standard like data dashboard type of layouts that you'll see in the real world, whether you're at a company or an advertising agency or anything like that. So what we're trying to do with a dashboard is pull together some data that tells a story, right? That's what a dashboard is trying to do. It's trying to bring out some of the storytelling component for a couple different reasons. So our dashboard might be providing a bunch of details. So instead of having to go to all your different places in your different spreadsheets, you might create a dashboard to put that all in one place. You might have a dashboard that's trying to prompt action. So you're trying to say whoever's looking at this dashboard should take a certain action based on what the dashboard shows. Right, for example, this one has got sort of a red, yellow, green barometer. You could imagine if that barometer was in red, you might want the viewer of the dashboard to go take an action, follow up with that customer, or see if they can get the deal done. So, you know, whatever kind of data is being tracked, right? A dashboard can also be used to answer questions. So these are the dashboards that tend to have a lot of filters or a lot of options where you as someone looking at it could go in and say, I want to see what the data looks like just for this one advertiser or just for this one podcast, or I want to see the data from last month compared to this month. Those types of sort of more exploration type dashboards are mainly going to be used to answer questions. So these are a few different ways that you can think about it. But typically what you're seeing in these screenshots here is a combination of information. So you're seeing charts, you might be seeing some individual numbers or some individual stats like we've got here. And you might also be seeing just a table of information, right? So some sort of summarized piece of information. Maybe you could imagine it might be your top top most downloaded shows this week, or your newest advertisers by deal size, that all that type of stuff is something that you might want in an at a glance dashboard type of format. And then obviously, depending on the software that you're using, we are obviously using Excel, so we have several different table chart options, but you might have several different types of charts or how you're showing these, right? This one's a bar chart, this one's a donut chart, which is a variant on a pie chart. They could have easily swapped the formats, right? So you can play around and pick different formats for what you're going to show in your dashboard. Okay, so let's talk about those three different types of dashboards. So I brought up a picture of sort of like a car dashboard. If any, I don't know if anyone drives here, but this is a really common dashboard that most people interact with. It's not specifically data related, but it's the same sort of categories of information that we're talking about. So a display dashboard, this is just kind of the looking at the details, summarizing information, right? When you're driving, this main stuff that you're seeing here is sort of your display dashboard, right? What's my speed? What's my engine temperature? What's the level of my gas tank, right? Those are all types of pieces of information that while you're driving, you don't want to have to like look in different compartments of your car to see that information, right? That would be insane. We want to see all that right up front where we can view it at a glance. Okay, then there's dashboards that are sort of more trying to prompt action, right? These are the ones that sort of act as a to-do list. So if you look at this type of dashboard and everything's like green, good, in the clear, you can sort of consider your to-do list empty. If you look at this type of dashboard and you see a bunch of things in red or like a long list popping up or some sort of notice popping up, a number over a certain threshold, those are all things that are intended to let you, the viewer, know that you have items on your to-do list, right? You should, hey, we haven't followed up with this customer in 3 weeks. So you should follow up with the customer and log your interaction with them, and then it'll drop off your dashboard because you've passed whatever threshold is set. So in your car, right, there's a bunch of symbols that tend to pop up in the middle, things like your engine overheating, someone is not wearing their seatbelt, maybe one of the doors didn't latch closed, right? Those are all things that they're not so much a summary of information as like a, hey, normally you don't see this light, and if you see this light, you should do something as the driver of the car. So that's a very like common example of an action dashboard, right? Something that's trying to provide action. Often that type of dashboard will even just like be empty if there's nothing to do, right? Like you could think of that as like your email inbox. If you go in there and there's no emails, nothing for you to do. That's never happened to me, so I don't know what that's like. And then toolbox dashboard. So this is more where you think about exploration. Maybe you're the one doing the slicing and dicing of the data, applying some filters. So there's nothing really in your like standard car stuff that is that, but I was thinking about if you listen to Apple Music or Spotify while you're driving, the sort of home screen that you get on that view is kind of a version of a toolbox dashboard, right? It's going to let you pick maybe by genre, by recently played, stuff you saved to your library. Those are all different filters you're applying to the quote unquote data set, which is your music library. And so it's going to let you kind of slice and dice by that information. So this is all just sort of a conceptual example to get you thinking about what the different functions of dashboards are. Typically in your dashboard, you might be combining a couple of these. Like it's pretty common to have sort of a summary dashboard, and then maybe down below or in another section, you might have a part with a bunch of filters where someone who looked at the summary and has more questions could hop over and do some filtering to try to answer their own questions, right? So you might combine these types, but these are sort of three distinct things that you're trying to do with dashboards. All right. Any questions about sort of types of dashboards? So the next thing you need to think about with your dashboard, this starts to get into the storytelling component, is what is the point of view of your dashboard? So you as the person who is designing and creating it, what's your point of view? These are kind of the three main guiding questions that you want to think about when you're setting up how you want it to look, what you want it to include. First thing is, what question should this dashboard answer? A lot of dashboards are going to end up answering multiple questions, but you do want to have kind of like one guiding question. Like, let's say you're going to design a dashboard for a business. It's going to have a bunch of different, charts about revenue and our clients and our, how many customers have renewed their subscription, any of this. But the overarching question that that dashboard is answering is, how is our business doing this month compared to last month? That's like an overall question that your dashboard might be answering. And then you might have a few different pieces of information within that that are answering that question. Okay. Second question, what action should be taken by the person viewing this dashboard? So in our example of the car, right, if you see the like somebody's missing their seatbelt light, hop on. Whoever's driving the car should probably either say, hey, does everyone have their seatbelt, on? Or they should maybe stop driving until they figure out if something's up with somebody's seatbelt, right? That's an action that we want somebody to take. That's why that symbol shows up in red. It might start making an annoying dinging sound when your car, right? Like that's very clearly trying to get the viewer to take a specific action. Similarly, with your with a data dashboard in more of a business setting, right? What is the action you want them to take? What are you driving them towards? When should it show up red versus green, for example? So this is a case where you might want to use color. You can start to think about how this would filter down to some of your design elements. But what are those actions? It's good to just jot those down in your mind. It might just be get all my information in one place. Maybe that's it. Maybe somebody just needs sort of a summary. Maybe their main action they're going to take is they're going to print it out, right? Maybe that's their action. And in that case, as you, the designer, you might want to think about making sure it fits on a page easily, right? So actions can vary, but something you definitely want to be thinking about. Lastly is, what decisions should this dashboard inform? So for any kind of dashboard, right, people are going to be taking in information, presumably to inform some sort of decision that they're going to make later. If I'm driving my car and I see that the gas is low, I need to make the decision about whether I'm going to refill the tank, whether I'm going to drive a little longer first, if I think I can finish my trip without needing to refill the tank, right? Those are all pieces of information that I'm going to take in from the dashboard and use to decide what I'm going to do. Pretty much any type of dashboard, even if it's just a summary dashboard, if it's an action dashboard, whatever it is going to, you should assume it's going to be informing some sort of decision, because that's why people look at pieces of data, right? When you look at your phone and it tells you how many steps you've taken today, or how many hours of screen time you've taken today, you're presumably looking at that because you're interested to know, did I, maybe I have a fitness goal. Did I hit my fitness goal? Or maybe I have a screen time goal. Did I exceed my screen time goal, right? So you want to be thinking about decisions, you want to be thinking about actions, and you want to be thinking about the questions the dashboard's answering, and most importantly, just sort of the overarching question it'll answer, and that'll inform how you set up your dashboard. Okay, actually getting into building your dashboard. The first thing I would always recommend is doing sort of a sketch or an outline. This is very similar to any type of writing process. This is also similar to when we were learning formulas in our formula session earlier in this series. We were doing more complicated formulas. We started combining some of them, but you always want to start with doing each formula in its own column, just to make sure you get it working, you understand what's going on. Similar idea with dashboards. So whenever you're creating a dashboard, you want to ask yourself those questions on the last slide, get really clear on what you're being asked to do. Start doing some brainstorming. What type of tables might make sense? What do you want to show in sort of a table versus a chart? Is there a single number you might want to highlight? These are kind of our standard options in Excel, so you can start to think about how you might want to use those. And then I would always encourage you to use pivot tables as sort of a drafting brainstorming tool, right? If you have your data set, even if you haven't done all your necessary calculations yet, pivot tables, as you saw in the last class, are really fast, right? You can select all your data, put in a pivot table, and start playing with it to see how you can do different summaries. So I always encourage setting up sort of a draft pivot table to just start playing around, seeing if you can get it to the right view that you want as sort of a sketching step, okay? All right, so this is the project that we are going to work on today. This is similar to the data that we've been working with throughout this workshop. So your role, you are the marketing analyst for our network of podcasts. We've got our 500 podcasts that we're working with. And the COO of the network has asked you to create a dashboard to track the company's top key metrics, okay? So these are the metrics that the COO has asked you to display in a dashboard form. First, I want to see monthly downloads across the network by podcast content category. Next, they want to see our top 5 advertisers and their average CPM. CPM is our cost per 1,000 downloads. They want to see our cumulative revenue so far this year compared to last year, or I think I actually just did, I ended up just doing 1 year in our data set to simplify this. So cumulative revenue over the 1 year. And then one more chart or statistic that you think, based on this prompt, that you think might be interesting for the COO of a company to look at. So we're going to have data. Let's see, do I have it on the next screen? Okay, the data set is here. It's a similar link to last week. It's a little bit modified from previous weeks, but we'll have shows and advertising campaign data on that data set. So you'll use that for those first 3. And then I just encourage you to brainstorm one other thing that you think might be of use. Could be a single number, could just be another chart you think would be interesting to look at. All right, but before we get into any of the design stuff, just sort of thinking about this prompt, what sort of dashboard do you think we might want to be creating here? Is this a display, more of an action, or more of a sort of toolbox filtering type of dashboard? Yeah, just display because. Great, summarizing information. We see that our audience is the COO. The COO probably isn't the person going out and making individual sales deals, right? So they're probably not going to be taking a ton of action based on this dashboard. They mainly want a summary. They might want to be able to do some filtering, right? Typically, like someone in a leadership position might have some more follow-up questions about the data. So we could think about adding a few filters. So maybe it's primarily a display dashboard with a little bit of toolbox dashboard in there. But yeah, primarily this type of thing that we're creating is going to be a display dashboard. All right, I'll repeat this. This will be repeated on the slide where we actually do this. So you don't need to memorize this. Okay, so let's talk about a really important step that I think people often skip when they're designing dashboards. And this is actually kind of a fun side of Excel that you might not use very often. You can do very quick sort of visual sketches in Excel, just like you would in the other Microsoft tools, just with text boxes. And this is a really good way to just sort of like get in your mind, same way you would sort of sketch out on a napkin, how you want your desired end product, your dashboard to look. So for example, if I were going to be creating my dashboard of my ice cream shop, right, this is a little sketch that I just made in 3 minutes in Excel, right? I thought, okay, let's see, I want to show my flavors. Okay, flavors are a bunch of categories. So I probably want to do a pie chart. Okay, I probably have that at the top. And then I'd want to know of those flavors, which are the most popular, like what are the names of the most popular ones? So maybe I just do a simple table, right? I do my Rocky Road was ordered 100 times. I just do a simple table there. And then, okay, I want to know something about sales. Maybe I would do sales over time. If I'm thinking about sales over time, I probably want to use some sort of line graph or bar graph to show something chronologically. So maybe I would put that across the bottom here. That's it. That's a level of sketch. Very like rough draft outline. You can do text boxes in Excel from insert text box, and you can drag them around. They don't get glued to the cells where they are. It's super helpful to just be able to sketch out where are things, where do I want to go, and it'll help you stay focused when we get to the actual building portion. All right, so with that, to start our project, this is the same prompt from before, right? So these are the 4 pieces that we want to add on our dashboard. I would like you all to grab the data set so you can take a look at it. It's, like I said, similar, but slightly different from previous weeks. And then do a little whiteboard sketch like I just showed you of your dashboard. So you can just create a new sheet, grab some text boxes, or just sort of type in the cells if that's easier. What are you thinking? Like which things should be charts, tables? How would you lay it out? I would encourage you, for the sake of this exercise, to have at least one visual chart and at least one sort of table of information in there, but up to you on which ones are which. And to do that, I always recommend, like I said before, make a pivot table, practice dragging and dropping stuff playing around, making sure you can find the kind of information that you need. Make sense? All right. I'm going to give you all a couple minutes to get that downloaded, do an initial sketch, and then I wanted to maybe see what you got. Yeah. Perfect. Now we gotta categorize and let's put down like that. Now we've got our categories and our total balance. Doesn't grant what's only the first. Option there, this is like the type of data that you want to send us. That part. Does that make sense? It could be, you, so that's you to decide, do you think that for this one, you want it to be a pivot table, would you want it to be a bar chart? Or would you want it to be a pie chart, like what's the, what would be, like looking at this information, so it's some of the right stuff. If you were gonna be like consuming this information, given this way, you would want to see it. Yeah, exactly, so your final product from this should look kind of like from this step, we're going to actually build the dashboard after this. But right now you're just creating something that looks like this. Right. So like, okay, so you did your little pivot table. You're like, okay, I see the categories, kind of a big number of downloads. Would I want to do that as a table or a chart? Just make a little note for yourself as to what you would want to do and where you'd want to place it on your final layout. Does that make sense? Cool. How you guys doing? Good? Can see what you got?
But I haven't added,
Yeah.
I haven't added the one more stack.
Okay, cool. Yeah, looks great.
Thank you.
Oh, you started on a chart already. Okay, cool. Great.
A step there, we did it rapid.
Yeah, so we will, we can, we're gonna create the actual charts and stuff themselves, and so you're a little bit ahead. But just think about where you want, so you're gonna create maybe 3 or 4 total different things. Think about like where you want them on your layout. Like which one do you want at the top? Which kind of charts? You could, this step is really just like jot down some notes for yourself of what should everything be, and then we're gonna go through and actually make them in a moment. So you're a little bit ahead, but make sure you have a sketch of what they're gonna be and sort of where. So we can do some kind of layout at the end. Yeah, so you just want to think about, what you want your charts to be. So if you don't quite know what you want your charts to be, it can be helpful to make a pivot table just as a brainstorm. To sort of see like, oh, are there a lot of categories or there are a few categories, but that kind of thing. But you don't have to make the table of this stuff. You mainly just want to get to some sort of like, do you think you're gonna make like a line chart or a bar chart for which ones? Does that make sense? So like for the first one, for the category, like what kind of chart are you thinking? Might want to do? Right, great. Okay, so maybe just drop down a note to yourself somewhere. You can do it in your chat, whatever. Just a note that says, all right, pie chart for a category. Exactly, yeah, if you wanted to do a line chart for that one, perfect, yeah. Yeah, just to kind of get, like, sketch out for yourself what sort of the checklist of things to do. Yeah, cool. Thanks. Okay, So you should have some sort of outline, some sort of thing. If you're still working on it, that's okay. But this is the idea, right? So to sort of jot down, once you have your requirements from whoever your client is, you have some idea in your mind of whether it's an action dashboard or a summary dashboard. You want to just sort of jot down what you want it to look like at the end. This is important because once you get into creating each of your little charts and tables and stuff, you can forget some of this. I know it can seem maybe a little bit basic to sort of lay it out like this, but once you get all in there with your formulas, it can be easy to sort of forget what you were originally aiming to do. So I recommend taking a moment to write this step out. All right. Yeah.
How did you paste the white boxes?
Yeah, so those are the text boxes. So for those I did, let's see, on my sheet here, from your top ribbon, if you go insert and text box, and then it'll give you a little like pointer thing like this, and then you just drag and drop my text box. And from this, then you can format this as just sort of any regular text, make it bigger. When I'm doing these layouts, I like to do in the center and then align it in the middle, just so it's like a more clear sort of like label. It's kind of like a fun. And then I can just drag it around like anything. So it's not tied to a cell. It's not a formula. It's whatever. It's just kind of there. You don't want to use text boxes for any kind of actual data analysis. So any of the stuff we've done in the previous weeks, do not add any text boxes. You're not gonna be able to do a formula in a text box, for example, right? Like if I do like equal Len, Rachel, like it's text. It's not going to ever read it as a formula. So don't use these for actual, like, don't ever type data into a text box in a spreadsheet, any of that. But they can be great for the sort of final step, which is some brainstorming. Now in your final dashboard, if you want to add a little like context text for your users or like a link for your users to some other website, text boxes are great for that because you can do all the nice formatting stuff. Great question. All right. So thinking about getting started with building our dashboard. So once we have some kind of sketch like this, we have some idea what we're building, we have a few questions from our client, then we're going to start building. So each item in your dashboard is called a component. So in this dashboard, for example, my pie chart is one component, my table of ice cream flavors is a component, and my line graph of my sales over time is a component. So this dashboard, excluding my little extra text box here, get rid of that. So this dashboard has 3 components. And that's true whether you're thinking about dashboards in Excel or other tools down the line. These sections are called components. So you want to build one component at a time. It's sometimes easiest just when you're working to kind of work each one out in its own sheet, kind of get it to show up how you want, and then worry about combining them onto one sheet later. This is because we saw last week with pivot tables, as you edit a pivot table, it can sort of suddenly change sizes if you suddenly add columns or switch to rows. So it can be hard to do the layout sort of before you're done all on one screen. So I would recommend if you have 3 components, I would probably make 3 different tabs in my sheet. I would maybe do a different pivot table for each one, kind of play with the formatting, get them all sorted out, and then at the end, move them all to one tab. Make sense? All right, last week we talked about pivot charts versus just regular charts. When you're creating a dashboard, you almost exclusively want to use pivot charts. So create a pivot table and then create a pivot chart from there so you can take advantage of all of this kind of summarizing it's doing for you so you're not having to write any manual formulas. There are certainly cases where you'd want to be able to create a single stat or single statistic, single number, metric, whatever you want to call it. For those, you don't necessarily need a pivot table. You can do it with a pivot table, but you can also just type a formula directly into a cell. So if I wanted to just have, average number of scoops per order as like a single number in my dashboard, I could just do equals, use my average formula, select whatever my data is, and have a number. And I might, for a single stat, if I'm going to do that, I might just increase the font size, maybe make it bold, and then add a little text that's like average scoops per order. So for single stats, you can definitely do something like this for a dashboard. That's also great because then as you update, for any formula, as we've talked about, is going to pull in your updated data if you've selected your whole column. So you might have a single stat like this, but pretty much anything else should be a pivot table or a pivot chart rather than like a static table. Does that make sense? All right. Okay, and then lastly, as you're building stuff, as you have a few different tabs, you want to make sure that you add enough like labels and notes for yourself that you know what each component is. So don't like stress out too much about formatting or getting the colors exactly right or anything like that at this stage. You just kind of want to get like a draft version of each chart in a different tab. I think you already started on this, right? So you've got your bar chart. Maybe you don't want the bars to be blue in the final one, whatever, that's fine. Don't worry about that for now. Just sort of get the format of the chart, make sure the data is showing up right, like sort of gut check that it makes sense. Yeah, so that's kind of like the next phase of building one of these. Okay. All right. So that's what we're going to do now. So you're going to take the sort of outline sketch that you just made, and then you can think of this as like a first stab or a rough draft at each of your charts. So if you wrote down, I want to make a pie chart for the categories, and I want to make a line chart for the revenue, and I want to make, I don't know, a little table for the top advertisers. Great. So you could start in one tab and just do your pivot table for the top advertisers. Make sure you get the average CPM to show up correctly. Great. So that's the sort of level we want to do right now. Does that make sense? Okay. So you should come out of this step with like a sort of a working draft of your 4 different components. These 4, your downloads, your advertisers, your revenue, and one more stat or chart you might want to see. Now, I'll make a note about your revenue in the data set that I gave you for, I'll bring it up here. The data set that I gave you for campaigns. So this is campaign history across 2023. You have a campaign ID, you have your advertiser name, you have the CPM, which is, again, this is our cost per 1,000 downloads. This is the dollar amount. You have the ID of your show that the ad ran on, and then you have the month that the campaign ran. So in order to figure out revenue from this information, you're going to need to use this formula. Revenue is CPM times downloads over 1,000. Okay. So you don't have downloads on this piece of your data, but you do have downloads over here in your shows. Okay, so your show has an ID that's the same in this thing as show ID. That's ID in your show table. Okay, and you've got a download number over here. So in order to get revenue, you're going to need to combine download info over to here and be able to use a formula to get your revenue. So I don't remember our tool for combining data sets. If I want to go look for this show ID in this column and grab its monthly downloads number. I don't remember which formula that is. VLOOKUP, you got it, or XLOOKUP if you want, same thing. So in order to figure out revenue, you're going to need to add a column to this guy that'll do a VLOOKUP and then a formula for revenue. Make sense? If you're a little rusty on VLOOKUP from a couple weeks ago, remember that you can do your insert function here, and you can get yourself a little reminder of what VLOOKUP looks like. It'll give you your little helper text. Same thing for XLOOKUP, which this is my old version of Excel, so I don't have XLOOKUP, but you guys probably have XLOOKUP on yours. Okay, make sense? Right. Yeah, you almost always want to put false. Yeah. Yeah, true is going to let it do like a fuzzy match, but the fuzzy match is not super accurate. So you usually want to, yeah. And if you use XLOOKUP, it defaults to that. So you don't have to type. Yes. Yeah. No, you're all good. We can do a quick review too. Are you stuck at a certain point? Do you want to talk to it? Okay. What you got? Okay, let's do it together. So here we can, are you guys working on this too, revenue over here? Yeah. Okay, great. Let's do a review. All right. So I'm here in my campaigns. I've got my CPM. I know that this is my formula for revenue. So I already have my CPM, but I know I'm missing my downloads, right? So that's what we're doing. All right, so I'm gonna come over here and do, let's see, show downloads. I'm gonna start by creating my new column so I can store my piece of downloads information. Then what do I do first for formula? Equal sign. All right, the name of this formula is VLOOKUP. Again, you can do this with XLOOKUP also if you want, very similar. Okay, so VLOOKUP, it's going to remind me of my 4 arguments. So lookup value, that's the thing I want to go look for in my other table. That's the thing that ties it to my other table. So what's my thing that ties it to the other table here? ID, and specifically which ID? Show ID, right? Because my other table has show ID. My other table doesn't have campaign ID, right? It shows. So I'm going to go to my show ID right here. All right, then I'm going to go to my table. So I'm looking for show 209. Where am I going to go look for show 209? I'm gonna go look at my table array, which is this guy. I'm just going to go and select all these columns all the way across. So it's just going to say A through H. All right. And I'm going to do a comma. So I get to my next argument. You see it bolded it right here. So I know I'm on to my next one. Which column am I looking for? So which column has my downloads information? It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Column 6. So I'm going to put 6 in here because it's a 6 column over from my ID. And then in here, I recommend always putting false. This is if you put true, it'll allow sort of fuzzy matches, but for numbers, that doesn't work very well. And for text, I find it doesn't work very well either. I would pretty much always recommend putting false there. All right, then you're gonna hit enter on your keyboard, and then you're gonna get a number in your field here. So we see our formula in our formula bar, equals VLOOKUP. We got our arguments, and then we see our number down here. When you first write a formula, you should always sort of like gut check that it makes sense. So in this case, that's easy. I'm gonna go say, all right, what are the downloads of show 209? And hopefully it's 186,000 downloads. So I can just go manually check that over here, go over my shows table, scroll down to show 209. One of my downloads. There we go, same number. So I know my formula works. That's always a check you want to do. If you see a different number there, that might mean something's off with your formula. Maybe you're looking up the wrong ID. All right, and then once I know my formula works, I can copy it all the way down. If I'm on my little cursor and I go in the corner where it turns from like a little white plus sign to a little dark plus sign, and I can double click and it'll autofill right on down. Make sense? Okay.
Like revenue,
Mhm.
what formula should,
That's this guy right here.
do I just type it in like the equal sign?
Equal sign first. Yep. Yes, you can do it in the first row first, right? So just in your first row there, like row 2, you could do equals, and then how would you do it for that row? Instead, we're gonna go emotions. We're gonna select that. That makes sense, is that the only thing you had everything right, except you were just looking for the ID, same table.
I think I'll do.
Yeah, exactly, so. So what you'll see once you have your formula is you'll see the formula up here and then you see the number. So then you go to the little dot. Yeah. Yeah, it'll copy down and go in. Revenue formula is right here. Yeah, so for this one, just because it's one of the simple math ones, you actually don't need like a main formula. You can just do formula for this one. We'll just start with the equal sign in your cell. And then you're gonna do whatever cell your CPM is in. So if you're just in your row 2, right, like which column is your CPM in? So column C. Yeah, okay, so I would do equal sign and I would do C2. And then I would do times, which on the keyboard is my answers. And then I would do my downloads, which column is your downloads in. That's all right. So that's 2. And then I would do divided, so just 2 slash. That's exactly this. Just right here. Any breaks, maybe? Oh, yeah, so there's no formula for, like, there's not like a built-in formula for doing this kind of revenue. So, yeah, so you're talking about this. Yeah. Yeah, it's for different businesses, revenue is calculated on. Yeah. How you doing? Good. All right, very cool.
But I don't know how can I sort it to only shoot.
Okay, great. So let's look at how you doing over here. Hanging in there?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so let's talk about this one. So we wanted to do our top advertisers and their current CPM. Okay, so something that I might do here. Let's see, advertisers and average CPM. Okay, so far, this is just a simple pivot table. It's on my campaigns. And I've got in my rows, I've got my advertiser name. I've got my sum of CPM and my sum of revenue. Now, sum of CPM isn't very meaningful because it's just a rate. That's why I want my average. So I'm going to change this to average before I do anything. Changing to average is in my pivot table. If you hit the little icon next to any of your options, you could choose how you want to summarize them. So in this case, I want to summarize as average. I'm going to hit OK, and I'll see my pivot table update right away, which is awesome. And then before I do anything else, just to make this easier to read for myself, I'm going to select these columns and change them into currency columns, just so it defaults to like dollar amounts. It's a little easier for me to read. I could say, okay, $40 for a, a really popular podcast. That's a reasonable CPM that checks out. Okay. All right. The question would be how to limit this to just the top few. Usually when we want to limit something like this, we would want to apply a filter. So in this case, I'm going to add a filter to my pivot table. So I'm going to click into my pivot table. So my field editor opens up, and I'm going to think about a filter that I would want to add. I don't know. We want our all time, so I don't necessarily want to filter out a specific advertiser. So yeah, I have a couple options. One thing that I could do here is I could look at my chart and say, all right, let me at least sort. So I'm going to sort by my top, let's say I want to sort by CPM, which I think I might already be doing, but let's just double check. So I can sort by average of CPM descending. Okay, there we go. So now it's sorting by my average CPM descending, and now it's showing Chewy at the top and Hyatt at the bottom with the lowest CPM. All right, so now I've got it sorted. As far as limiting, there's a couple options here. One would just be to like look at this and say, all right, I'll just unfilter my bottom option. So let's say I don't want to show Hyatt, Casper, etc. This option works well for like a one-time dashboard if you just want to limit it. But let's say you're going to update this dashboard every month. You could imagine that next month Hyatt is one of the top ones. Then you'd have to come in here and like manually do some checkboxes. So kind of up to you. You could just sort of do this in the display of your dashboard. You could just sort of like display it so that it's like your top 5 or sort of at the bottom so that they can like scroll down and still see the rest if you want. You can also decide as a dashboard designer to keep your full list. Kind of up to you. But anytime they're asking for top, at a minimum, doing a sort is a good option. Yeah. All right. Okay, so I've got an initial chart set up for, that's our second option, our advertisers and their average CPM. You could imagine here, if I'm thinking top advertisers and average CPM, maybe I would actually sort by revenue here. So who are biggest spending advertisers? Maybe I'd sort that way. And then I can also just see their CPM information next to it. It's also a valid approach. These are the sorts of things that you, as sort of the person closest to the data, you understand that difference, that we could sort by sum or we could sort by average. The person who's requesting a dashboard from you or asking that data for that data often doesn't ask in that level of detail. So you just got to do some of your own, either go back and ask them a clarifying question, which way do they want it sorted, right? Or use your judgment to say, I think probably it makes the most sense to view it this way. And then you can kind of move forward from there. So the sort of nuance of dashboard building is that you're making a lot of small decisions like this. You probably won't get guidance on every single one. So the best thing you can do is kind of try to put yourself in their shoes, think about what they might want to see or what might make sense for their context. All right, so this is the one sort of what like our draft component for number 2. So our top advertisers and their current average CPM. All right, let's look at what are our other, does anyone have a draft for item 1, or monthly downloads by content category? Yeah, what you got?
Separated by category in the x-axis.
Okay.
And weekly downloads on the y-axis.
Okay, great. So we did a bar chart, column chart with our categories and then our downloads, determining the size of our bar. Great. Totally valid. All right. What about revenue for the year? Anyone got a component for revenue for the year? Sure.
A table listing some of our.
Okay. Great. Cool. So that's a great example. Let's bring that up in our pivot table. So now that we've got revenue as a column here, I'm going to do another pivot table and demonstrate this. So we've got our pivot table. I just want to see revenue. So if I just drag revenue down to my values, I can just get this one single value sum of revenue. Boom, that's my revenue for the year. I can format this as a dollar amount. And eventually, if I wanted to put this on my dashboard, probably all I would do is maybe make the font a little bigger. Sum this up, it's already got this nice little label, sum of revenue. That could basically go on my dashboard. Great. You can accomplish this it's for something like this, kind of up to you if you want to do it as a pivot chart or as a formula. I could also just do equals sum, come over here and do my revenue, hit enter. same deal. It's sort of a formatting choice on whether I want the little like auto label thing to come up, and then, I could just type my own label, revenue 2023. Both totally valid, just kind of depends on how you want your visual style to look at the end. Also, if you're creating a toolbox dashboard, the more pivot tables, the better, because somebody could like click into this and then muck around with your pivot table if they wanted to. So totally up to you. But yeah, that's a totally valid way to hit number 3, cumulative revenue for the year. I can just show it as a pivot table. That's just a super simple pivot table, no rows, no columns, just a value. Or I could just do a simple formula. Multiple ways to do that. I could also, when I got this requirement, I could also do something like a line chart by, with each month and the revenue each month. That would also be a valid way to show this one as it's asked here, right? Just kind of depends. You gotta kind of like use your judgment, maybe try a few different ways, see how it looks. It's kind of how dashboard building goes. All right, any questions about those 3? Like where we're at with those 3 components? Totally fine if you did your chart a different way or did your formula a different way, but that's the type of thing we want to be getting to. Yeah, for sure. So if I wanted to show different months, but for different revenue, I would probably do a pivot table. So I'm just going to reuse this one, but you could create a new one. So I just did a pivot table off of all my campaigns data. I would put revenue as my value. And then if I wanted to split it out by month, I would drag my month down to my rows. And this is the pivot table thing. So because I just have some regular cells here, it's giving me a notice it's going to overwrite them. I'm going to say that's okay. All right. And then it's going to do its pivot table magic, and it's going to split it out by month for me. So then from here, I could make it into a chart, for example. So let's do insert pivot chart. Great. And then it's going to make me a little bar chart. I could then use my chart options and make it into a line graph or whatever else. Maybe I want a line graph like this. Cool. Revenue for the year. Also a valid way to show revenue over the year. So there's a little bit of creativity that comes into this too, right? Kind of up to you. All right. Did anyone think of another component they might want to add? Something else that you might want to add to this dashboard for the COO? Ooh, what category is making the most money? Great. Okay, so maybe a pivot table with your categories and then revenue brought in by those shows. Awesome. Great. So how would you so right now we have our shows tab has our category right here, and then we've got revenue and our campaigns tab. So how would you combine that info?
And that there be like right beside the revenue to show
Beautiful.
category.
Great, just added another VLOOKUP to pull in the category. So just the same way that we pull in the downloads, you could write another VLOOKUP that instead of pulling in column 6, we're basically pulling in column, whatever that is, 7. We got our category, that would put our category right here. You can do the same pivot table. Awesome. That's great. And then you can maybe sort by revenue so you can get your top category at the top. Fantastic. That's a great idea. Either of you over there, any other components you wanted to add to your dashboard?
I was adding sort of the top 5 advertisers and the percent of the total revenue.
Ooh, okay, percent of total revenue. Very good. So another similar to one thing that we have on here, but a different view to look at it by percent. Great. And how did you do your percents with the pivot table or with a formula?
Down to 5, having the percents based on some of the 5.
Right. Yeah, the percents are. Yeah, so that's the case where you might want to leave you could leave your whole table and just you could highlight the top 5 in a different color, for example. That could be a good solution. Fix it with formatting at the end. Yeah. Cool. All right. Did you have any thoughts on anything you wanted to add? Any other charts? Also, totally fine if you didn't get there, but. Say again. Top 5 shows make the most revenue. Great. Totally. You could totally do that. So if I wanted to think about revenue by show, I could do it with that same pivot table. So I'm over here. I have revenue by month, so I could take out month. Oh, and by the way, maybe we did or did not talk about this in our pivot table week, but usually when you have dates, it's going to do some nice auto formatting for you with the months, right? It added our month labels, just kind of like a nice pivot table feature. If you're trying to get that working, you want to make sure that your data, your source data was formatted as a date. So make sure your column's formatted and it'll do some nice date formatting for you. But yeah, so same deal with our pivot table. I could have revenue. I could bring my shows down here as my rows. And of course, I've got a ton of shows. This is confusing because I had this as formatted as dollars before, but these are show IDs. So I'm going to go back and format it as a number. Get rid of my decimal points. Okay. And then if I want to know my top shows by revenue, I would sort this instead of by ID. I would come in and sort it by my revenue, descending. So I get the big guys at the top. And these are my shows that are earning the most revenue. I could also go back to my thing, add another VLOOKUP to get the title of the show from my other tab, which would make my table here, so it would be a little nicer here to have the title versus show number 457, but totally same idea. Great. So even with just sort of like a simple example, no like real substantive business context behind it, you guys came up with 3 great other things that somebody might want to add to a dashboard like this. So that's a lot of how the design process works. Often when you get a request like this, if you're going to be making a dashboard, it can be great to think of something extra like you guys just brainstormed and add it in. It's a great like sort of go above and beyond, especially if you're in some sort of internship or new role. It's a good way, and also just a good way to show off your data skills. Maybe it's an extra chance to throw in a VLOOKUP in there, right? It's pretty cool for folks who don't know how to do this sort of thing or aren't as familiar with it. Going like a little bit extra can be a really good look. So, yeah, so it's partly a brainstorming exercise for you all, and I think a good habit to get into anytime you're making anything with data. If you see something else that you think is useful based on digging around in there, it's always great to add it. All right. Everybody feeling okay? We got a few charts, pivot tables, ideas of what our final dashboard is starting to take shape. Making sense so far? All right, great. Okay, so let's take a second. This is usually what I do when I'm sort of like partway through putting together a dashboard. So I've looked at all my data, I've put together a few of my charts, I have an idea of where I'm going. I've maybe thought about a few other things I want to add. Maybe I'm adding some percentages, I'm looking by show, whatever. This is a good moment before you like do all your final, like get them all lined up and make it like look visually nice, to come back to your dashboard point of view. So these are the same questions that I brought up before. So what question is this dashboard trying to answer? What are the actions? What are the decisions? And then as you answer those questions or think about those answers, do those inform anything about your design? Anything that you want to do with your layout, with how you want to title things, with the type of display you want to use? So I want to pause here and just do this as a quick exercise. So for this dashboard, what is the overall question that this dashboard is answering? Performance of each of the shows, performance of our podcast network, maybe a little bit more broadly. Yeah, totally. Performance of our shows as far as it comes to monthly downloads, earning revenue. Great. All right. What action should be taken by a viewer of this dashboard, if any? Adjust accordingly, maybe. So we know this is going to a leadership position, maybe it's going to inform their strategy. So if they're looking at this dashboard and they see, for example, that in our categories, one of the categories is getting way more downloads than others, that could be a piece of strategic information that they use, which kind of ties into our last thing here. What decisions is this going to inform, right? So as the COO, what decisions am I making? I might be deciding you know, what kind of advertising sales opportunities is our company going to go after? What kind of shows is our company going to try to bring onto our network, right? Those are the type of decisions. And so kind of tied together for this one, sort of action or decisions. Those are things that we want to be thinking about with this. It can also be really helpful to jot this down, like just jot down a quick sentence of what is this dashboard trying to do. So overall, how are our shows doing? Question mark. Including that at the top of your dashboard is really helpful because it orients somebody to what am I even looking at, especially for people who aren't quite as data oriented or don't look at dashboards as often. A little text at the top is really, really important. Okay. Make sense? All right. Okay, next we're going to get into interactive features. So we talked about this very briefly at the end of our last session. So especially for any dashboard that's kind of a toolbox dashboard, you want to think about opportunities to add filtering tools. So we talked about this last time. There's kind of two different ways with your pivot charts to add filtering. One is called a slicer. These are a little bit more visual. It does the same thing as a filter, but it's just a little bit more sort of user-friendly buttons. These are especially great if you're going to be sort of giving this to someone who's a little bit less familiar with Excel. So from your chart, you can go into your ribbon under Analyze, and you'll get an Insert Slicer option. And then you can choose which column you want to slice by. So same deal as our building our pivot table. For example, let's go back to this guy. I'm going to swap this back to brand just for simplicity. Okay, great. Let's do this. So then from my chart, I can go into my Analyze ribbon. I can do Insert Slicer, and I can choose what I want to slice by. So maybe in this case, I'm looking by advertiser. Maybe I want to be able to slice by month. Let's look at that. So then it's going to give me a list of my month options. Maybe I just want to see July. So this is how the revenue stacks up for July. I could also switch it. I could come into my pivot table and say, I actually want to do by month in my table. So I'll take this out. I'm going to take off my slicer. So you'll notice that when I switch my table around, it's keeping only the data from June because it's auto applying this filter to my table. So I can come over here, hit my little clear filter option. That'll bring this right on back. And then for my slicer, you'll see I get a new kind of option up in the top. So once I have my slicer and I click on it, I get my little option. I can see what my slicer is set to look at, right? So it's looking at my campaign month, what it's labeled. And in this case, I put my months here, so I don't necessarily want this to be my month anymore. I can just select this and hit delete, get rid of that slicer. I'm going to create a new one because this time I want to slice by advertiser. Let's do this. Again, this is great, right? It's taking advantage of all the pivot table stuff. It's rolling up just my list of advertisers, no duplicates, any of that. And I could say, all right, just for Chewy, what did their spend look like this year? Okay, looks like it went up and down, maybe seasonally. Look at my different one. Same deal here. Slicers also allow you to do multi-select. I think it's if you do command. Yeah, I think you can do command click or control click on a PC. So you can select a few different ones. So same thing as a filter, just a little more user-friendly. If you don't like one that you have added, it kind of functions like a text box where you can just drag it around, it floats on top. You can also just delete. All right, and then filters, very similar. We talked about these with pivot tables, which is just a quick reminder. I can drag anything into the filter section of my pivot table. So I'm in my pivot table and I'm in my field list. I can say I want to be able to filter my whole table, and then I can just come down here and do this. This isn't quite as like pretty and user-friendly as the slicer that we just had, right? So I would, in general, if you're going to be sharing with others, would recommend a slicer. All right, any questions about filtering, slicing? Okay, great. Okay, so now we're going to start bringing it all together. So you should have a few different components hopping around, you should have a pivot table here, chart there, etc. I want you now to create a new sheet and bring all your components into one sheet. Okay, so we're trying to get to a dashboard view where all of our different components are in the same place if you haven't already done this. Maybe we're doing this as we went. I don't know. That's also fine. But if you have them in different sheets, get them combined into one sheet. And then add at least a filter or slicer somewhere to your dashboard. To one of your charts, add a filter or slicer option so that our COO could come in and filter themselves. Okay. Yeah, so a filter is this guy right here. So in your pivot table, it's right here. So I can drag any fields that I want to filter by as a filter just here. Or instead of doing this, so this will give me my option to check and uncheck my brands. Instead of doing that, I can come in here to my chart. I can do analyze, insert slicer. And it's very similar, right? You can see I have the same list of options, but then it's going to show up as a little pop-up right here instead. And I'll get the same thing done. One last thing I'll note, if you already have a pivot table somewhere, once you have it set up, you can come to your pivot table analyze ribbon and choose move pivot table. And that'll let you just move it to a different sheet. So I can do move, and I could just hop around and click on wherever, which other tab I want it to go into, hit OK, and it'll move my whole table. So you don't have to worry about copy pasting or rebuilding it somewhere else. You can just go move from the analyze ribbon. I'm gonna give you all a minute to get everything into one sheet. Everything you have so far, if you didn't get to all the components, that's okay. But you should have hopefully at least 2, maybe 3 or 4 components into one sheet, one tab in your dashboard. Add at least one filter and or a slicer to your dashboard. Yeah. You gotta just click on a specific cell, and then if you hit OK, no problem. So you just click on the sheet and then where each you have a place. Ah, okay, just because your column wasn't wide enough. Yeah, so you drag it out a little bit, so you can drag between it. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. Yeah, so if you're getting a bunch of number signs, it usually just means your column is too small. That's gonna happen.
So I originally copied the table,
Okay.
but then when I changed it, trying to make another one, it became.
Wait, say that again.
So, the one that used to be here should be the bar chart for current top 5 advertiser and their average CPM.
Mhm.
But then when I tried to make another one with this one, it became, so should I like make it in the, yeah, I think I should make it in the new sheet.
Like when you copy pasted it over the other one, is that what happened?
Yeah, I copy pasted this one to here, but then when I tried to make another table out of.
Yeah, so you're gonna need a different pivot chart for, or
Okay.
pivot table for each one, because it's gonna feed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you got
Then I have to make it again.
it. Yes. Yeah, if you reuse your pivot table, it'll move your pivot charts. You want a different table to feed each chart. Yeah. Good clarification.
Okay, cool. How you doing your sort? Okay. Sort. Okay. Nice. Yeah, nice little rainbow effect going on. Very good. Very good.
Okay. Everyone do okay with filters, slicers? All right, cool. All right, so we're gonna kind of do finishing touches now. So hopefully you have some components on your same page. Hopefully you've got a slicer somewhere in there. All right, so let's talk a little bit about formatting. This stuff can also, I think, seem a little bit basic or simple, but it can be really easy to forget this stuff after you've made all these cool charts, and other people are not going to be able to gain any value from your cool charts if we don't have some of the supporting stuff. So every component in your dashboard, so each of our charts tables, every single one should have a title. Even if you've got like a pivot table that's got some like columns saying what's going on, it's always good in like the cell or two above that to type what is the title. What am I showing here? Is it monthly downloads by category? Is it monthly revenue by show? Whatever I'm showing, you want to type out a quick title above each of your components in your charts, in your pivot charts. It's a chart layout option to have a title. You should make sure you add that if you haven't already. You should also always make sure that your axes are labeled if it's a chart. So for example, in this guy, I've got my months. If your months are spelled out like words, that's fine. That's clear that those are months. But you might want to include, for example, this is 2023. Our chart doesn't show that. So if I were going to label my axis, I might say month 2023 as my axis label. In any of your charts, I can come in and do that with my, pivot table design. I could come in here to do my chart elements. So in this case, I want to add an axis title. I'm going to do my vertical axis. And I could just come in here and say revenue. Things like you want to make sure these numbers have dollar signs on them. If they don't have dollar signs, make sure that they're formatted as currency in your pivot table. All of that type of stuff is going to make it possible for somebody consuming your dashboard to add. So if we're going to add my horizontal one, I might say months 2023. All right. Monthly revenue, something like this. So you don't have to go overboard, just super simple. But if you share this with someone without any labels, they're not going to be able to do any of our actions with it, like we talked about, right? They're not going to be able to understand, is there something I need to take? Could I use this to inform a decision? If I don't know what year this revenue chart is from, it's not going to be that helpful to me. I don't know if it's this year or last year. I don't know if it's all the years averaged together by month. Could be a bunch of different things. So every component should have a title. If it's a chart, you should make sure your axes are labeled. Should make sure you have units, like I said. So especially the most common one is just have a dollar sign on anything that's an actual dollar amount so that it's clear that other stuff is like a count of shows or whatever. In general, you should have a legend or data point labels or both. So in this case, I've just got my total. Legend is another chart option in your, where did I go? My design to do legend. So you can decide where it sits. Especially for any charts where you're sort of doing a subgroup. So if I were doing this by category, for example, you definitely want to make sure the legend is included on your chart. If it's a pie chart, it can be good to do. You can do data labels instead of a legend or both. So you can make some style choices, but just make sure that you have something that lets your viewer know which parts of the data or which. And anytime you have a more complicated chart or table going on, if you did any of the combination kinds of charts, in our chart options. So for example, when I come to my chart type, if I did one of these, which is a little less common, or if I did any of my combination charts, if I have bars and a line, if you're doing anything that's not just like a super straightforward chart, you always want to have a little, you can do it into text box. You can just type in the cell underneath, just type in a little explanation of what somebody is looking at. This is often skipped. Yeah.
How do you the
Yes. So once you're in your chart, once you click into your chart, it should pop you to a few different ribbon options. You should get pivot chart, analyze, design, and format. Under design, you can go to chart element, and then it'll give you axis titles, horizontal, vertical, chart title is your overall one, and a few other data labels, your legend, etc. You can also do play around with in that same spot under pivot chart design. If you go to quick layout, you can see which, like you can grab a layout that already maybe appeals to you. So in this case, you can see which ones like already have a little block in there for, so you can pick which one has sort of like the labeling that looks like you want. Yeah. All right. Next thing is just to think about overall size. So if you've got 3 or 4 components on your dashboard, you want to think about an appropriate size. So typically, most people are going to be looking at your dashboard on their laptop screen. So you want to make sure that if you've got 3 or 4 components, those components should both all fit on the screen and not be like super small on the screen. So you want to do just a little bit of visual design. If they're coming up kind of small, you can make your font a little bigger is a good option. You can also just make your like view size a little bigger in Excel. Up to you, you can play around with it, but I encourage you to make sure your dashboard is sort of like roughly screen size. Somebody shouldn't have to scroll a lot to see everything, but they also shouldn't have to squint. All right. Okay. A couple more notes on your dashboard. We were just talking about screen size. If you are building a more complicated dashboard, and I've certainly made plenty of these, sometimes you are going to have to scroll. I would encourage you to have more components further down than over to the right. It's more intuitive for people to scroll down than it is for them to scroll to the right. So if you need scrolling, go in that direction. And then we just talked about stuff you need on each component. There's also a few things that you should put on every dashboard. So whatever the tab is that is your dashboard, whatever the sheet is, there's a few things you need on there that are usually just pieces of text. So you could stick this all in a text box or a couple text boxes. You should give your overall dashboard a title. Okay, it's fun if this can be something memorable. Come up with like alliteration or a pun or something. It can be good to have a memorable dashboard name because that'll get people to refer to it. A purpose statement. This was why I kind of focused on the dashboard point of view part, right? Those couple of questions. You should really like write that 1 or 2 sentence, what it is, very simple, somewhere on your dashboard in a little text box. It will help you when you go back and remember it later. It'll help you when you share it with people. You should write that down on your dashboard. It's also important because if somebody comes across your dashboard and doesn't know what it's for, they might use it for the wrong thing. If somebody comes across this dashboard, they might use it for making 2025 projections. This data like isn't maybe the most best data set to use for that because it's only 1 year of data. It was 2023. Maybe that's not the most representative year, right? So if you have a sentence explaining what it's for, the end sort of client of it is more likely to use it correctly and not be confused. In general, you should always put your name and like your email on any dashboard that you make. So if somebody has questions, they can contact you. You should always put the data source. For something like this, we can put like internal company database. That's fine. Especially if you're combining data from multiple sources, you should make notes about, all right, I got my this from the internal company database. I combined it with market research on what we think the average employee size of these companies, whatever data sources you have, you should link to them. You should list them. Super important. And then you should always also have, this is good to put near the top of your dashboard, just your last updated date. Just like type in to a cell the date that you last updated your dashboard. Typically, dashboards are things that you would be asked to update maybe quarterly, maybe monthly, maybe weekly for some things. So you always want to have a last updated date there. And I would also recommend in your file name if you're going to be using it a bunch of times. I would say don't go like totally nuts on the formatting. Just be consistent about your style. Don't make every chart like a totally different color. They also don't all need to be the same color. You know what I mean? Have some balance. Once you have all your charts and text boxes and things in place, something that can be kind of fun to do visually, just to clean it up, is you can hide these grid lines that are here from your tab if you want to give it a bit of a cleaner view, especially if you think anyone might be printing it out or screenshotting it. This can be like a good tip. So if you're in your sheet, and you want to do this once you've got all your charts, because once you remove the grid lines, it's kind of a pain to see where stuff should go. But you can come up to your view tab and your ribbon, and you can select under show. I could unselect my grid lines, and then you see it gives me just like a white canvas behind my charts, a little cleaner to look at. So if you've got your 3 or 4 charts, you've got a couple text boxes, just cleans it up a little bit, kind of a nice touch, and make it look a little bit polished at the end. All right. Okay, one of the last important pieces is about organizing your sheets. All right, so in this process, you probably have something like I have, which is a bunch of little sheets down at the bottom. Okay, in your final, whatever final product you produce, you always want to have a clear label on whichever tab sheet is your primary one. So in this case, I might call this one dashboard. You can just double click on these to rename them. So I'm going to double click and type dashboard. And you can also drag and drop the order of your sheets to move them around. I would always put the dashboard one first. And I would also just give everything else a quick label. So like in this case, I would maybe just call this something like pivot. If I had another tab with my raw data, I might label it raw, or just one where I was trying out formulas, I could call it analysis. Just give every tab a quick name. Anytime you're sending a sheet to anyone else, sheet 1, sheet 2 is not clear. Probably they're not going to click on it. They're not going to know what it is. So just do yourself future self a favor. Add some little labels, especially for something like dashboards where you might be coming and updating it. Super helpful. All right. Last part of this. Okay, so I want you to take a stab at, oh, did you want to picture the last slide? Okay. All right. So go ahead and do a little formatting. I know this part isn't like our technical Excel. We've sort of done our charts, we've done our formulas, but this stuff is super important and it's a really good practice habit to get into the practice of. So I'll give you just a minute or two, give it a title, put a little sentence about what it is, put your name on it, do it in a text box, do it in a cell, whatever you want to do. But add these components to your dashboard, make sure your charts are labeled, stuff like that. It makes it look really clean. And then I would love to have, if you would take a screenshot once you're happy with it or relatively happy with it, if you would take a screenshot and send it to me. I would love to put them up so we can see. So I'll give you a couple minutes to tweak if you like. Oh yeah, you can just send me a screenshot, but yeah, your overall dashboard, you should have a title, give it a name of some kind.
Oh.
Yes, then yes, send me once you're ready, or even if you feel like you're not ready, but you're at an okay like stopping point, send me a screenshot. I want to see what you got. All right, maybe you kind of wrap up where you're at. If you feel like you're not totally finished, that's okay. Yeah, send me a screenshot of what you got so far. Excited to see them. All right, cool. Here's one of our dashboards. It looks great. Talk us through.
So it basically shows the performance of the podcast network on the top on the top, it's the cumulative revenue, and then you can slide it with like how many, like what advertiser made, how many avenue,
Awesome.
and then it will
Love that.
change with the advertiser name. And then the below, it's the average CPM
Perfect.
with the different advertiser, and then you can see the average.
Great. Super cool. I love this. So you have a clear, somebody opens this up and they can see, all right, I can pick my option and I can choose and I can filter kind of by different advertisers. Great. Updated today. I got your name. I understand what it's overall looking at. This is awesome. This is great. Yeah, I don't have a ton of feedback. I would say if you're doing anything cumulative in a chart, I would recommend doing the data labels option in your chart, which will it'll just spit out the actual revenue number right at the top of your column. That's a nice touch. If you want people to know the actual number for a chart like this, I wouldn't worry about it because it would make it kind of crowded to have all the numbers. And also you can get a sense of sort of relative. But yeah, kind of nice to put the actual number if you're doing an overall option. But yeah, this looks awesome. Very cool. Good layout. Everything's a good size. Takes up about the size of the screen. Looks good. All right. Waiting on 2 more dashboard screenshots. I will put the email back up. Yeah. Nice. Very cool. Very good. So you can also, I noticed the filter that you have is the same on, so you have the advertiser filter on both of your charts, like it's the same list of advertisers here. One option that you can set up with slicers, we didn't talk about this. So in your slicer, under your like in your slicer part of your ribbon, under report connections, you can connect the same slicer to multiple tables. So you can play around with that and see. There are cases where you might want to have it separate, right? If you don't want all the tables to move, but if you connect your slicer to the same one, you just wouldn't have to repeat sort of the real estate on your screen. So that could be a fun thing to add. Okay. All right. Let's look at this one. Okay, cool. I'm going to send this to my laptop.
Yeah, it's showing.
Yeah, nice. Okay, very cool. Of course. All right, let me get into this one. Paste. Okay, let's see if I can get into this one. Hopefully open it. Second. Beautiful. All right, what do we got for this guy? This back up. Very cool. Okay, should we come back in a second? Unless I just broke the projector. We'll see. What? No. Okay. Somehow no longer wants to. Okay. So tragic. Oh, I fixed it. Okay. All right. Great. You want to walk us through yours?
So I guess there's a slider and there's a chart.
Fantastic.
There's the total revenue as a percentage for each advertiser.
Awesome. Love that.
Current advertisers and with the revenue of the side, the other part of the chart,
Fantastic.
and caption on the far right.
Love it. Dashboard is intended to show total monthly downloads by category, information regarding performance of advertisers, and cumulative revenue. Fantastic. All right, a couple things I love about this. I love that you added the conditional formatting here. So anytime you're showing a table, adding conditional formatting is a great visual tool, looks awesome on a dashboard. You can also use conditional formatting on single values. So you can set it to be once it surpasses a certain amount. See if your team has a revenue goal, we're trying to hit $2 million this year. You could have this turn yellow when it gets close to 2 million and green when it gets above 2 million. That can be another fun way to use color, but this is awesome. I love your slicer, good layout. You got your description, which is awesome. I would say just to make sure that you include for your CPM and your revenue, make sure they're formatted as with dollar units, make sure we're clear on the revenue side, but chart looks great. This looks great. Table looks super awesome. Very cool. All right. One more over there. You want to drop me yours? All right. Oh no, your filter is. That doesn't work. I think that's other options to close itself. Cool. All right. Well, I will give you a second to do that, but I would love to see what you got. Cool. So that's sort of the end of our Excel time. I'll just make a couple last notes. So now that you've had the experience of creating an Excel dashboard, often these are the types of things you'll have to maintain in the real world. So that's one of the reasons I encourage you to have the updated date at the top so that you know when it was last updated. Remember when we talked about pivot tables last week, you have to click the refresh button in the table. So typically what you'll do to maintain this is you'll paste extra data into your raw data columns. And then you'll go into your analyze ribbon and hit refresh on your pivot table so that everything updates. Make sure you update the date. And if you're doing really frequent updates, like if you're finding that you're like created a spreadsheet, but you're kind of always going in there and pasting more stuff, doing refreshes, whatever, that might mean you're starting to outgrow Excel for this use case, and that would be a great time to upgrade to a more sort of formal database tool, which brings me to my next point. I talked about this a little bit last week, but we're doing SQL and Python in April. I think at least one of you said you already signed up. I would love to see you guys there. If you have done spreadsheets, this is not at all intimidating. This is very straightforward. SQL is basically Excel like formulas. It's the same logic. It's a very straightforward, it's like barely even a programming language itself because it's very straightforward to use. So I hope you guys will come to that. If you haven't already friended me on LinkedIn, you can do that also. But yeah, would love to see you all in April. Yeah, thank you all so much. I'm sorry? Yes, it'll be 4 to 6 on Mondays, starting April 1st for the first one. Yep, and that one will be 4 weeks. And that one will build on itself a little bit more. So if you can, if you're interested in the series, I would recommend trying to make to all of them because it's going to build a little bit more than this one did. But yeah, yay, cool. All right. And if you would like, if you get your file to reopen, if you want to send, I'd love to see what you got. But yeah, thank you guys so much for coming. Appreciate it. That sounds great. I will look forward to seeing you in April.